by the time the 7th century comes about, Christianity was all over the place, and now there were differences, there were schisms within the church, there were heresies spreading all around, particularly in the eastern part of the church, but Christianity had gained a tremendous foothold, and it is out of that culture that Islam or Muslims, whichever section we may be talking about, or the Arabs are concocting a theology to give themselves a voice among these people. So, and then this is the big puzzle. So now Islam was developed out of a mishmash of Christian, Judeo-Christian traditions, but they are all more or less infused by strong monotheistic and anti-Greek, anti-Roman and anti-Greek sort of cultural sensibility, and they've developed a philosophy or theology out of this potpourri, if you will, of religions. Now, to me, what interests me is that what happens next? What happens next, over time, Christianity and Judaism eventually evolve and move into different places, particularly for Judaism, maybe most notably in the 19th century. Christianity was a long evolving process, that started with, the Renaissance and the Reformation, and then of course the Enlightenment. And so for Charles Freeman, the Enlightenment is a second act of freedom, of cultural freedom that the West has known since ancient Greece. Between ancient Greece and the Enlightenment, there was a long period of struggle for freedom, and in fact, the eclipse of freedom with consequences that are still with us today. So what is it that happened? Why did Christians evolve differently? Why did Christians eventually disengage a little bit from their fundamentalist worldview and evolve into the Western world we know now? How did Judaism adapt to the various cultural environments it found itself into? But why has Islam remained very, almost maddeningly true to the kind of monotheism it found in its milieu? So the sin of Islam is a sin of loyalty to the kind of culture it borrowed from, but it hasn't been able to move beyond that. It remained, so solidly entrenched in that worldview, and that is what interests me the most. And for me, that going back to ancient Greece is another way of saying, let's rediscover the Enlightenment, if you will. Because without this, Enlightenment is our modern version of the ancient Greek culture. Just as an aside, very much, I'm sure you know a lot about American history. When the founding fathers of the United States were trying to establish a republic, they, for themselves, the first republic in modern history, many of them were deeply read in the Greek and Roman traditions. And in fact, even the iconography and the architecture of Washington is based on such things. So they were knowledgeable about that thing. They were very aware of the pitfalls of the Roman Empire, what happens when there was an excess of democracy, for example, or what happens when there was a switch from the Republican to the monarchical period in Roman history. So they read deeply into such matters before they began to conceptualize a republic for themselves. I have sat with people, and there were a lot of constitutions that were crafted in the Arab world, not a lot, but a few. And I sat with some of them, and none of them had read any of the making, none of them had any knowledge of the making of the American Revolution, particularly the American Constitution, the amount of reading and knowledge that went into making that Constitution. In other words, they're copying other constitutions. They may copy the French Constitution or the German Constitution, but there's not a deep philosophical interest in the subject of freedom as we understand it. So for me, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions, but for me, the kind of project that Anouar is doing and the kind of project that you are doing is a way to somehow liberate this culture from the stranglehold of the divine. And it is because the ultimate taboo in this Muslim majority nations is the Qur'an. As you all know very well, the Qur'an is a holy book, it's dictated by God, word by word, and it's immutable, it cannot be tampered with, and it's a very dangerous thing to do. But that has to change. That needs to be changed, because it needs to change only because we want the societies to develop, to have a better economy, to have more basic scientific research, to develop better universities, better healthcare systems, and not to always be constantly agreeing and resentful of the West. So we have all a common interest in keep challenging this society to think outside of the box, to begin to approach our histories in a very mature way. So this is the forum. I think I don't have any revelations to make. I have any discoveries that I'm going to show you, but this is the forum where this is the forum that can do this very successfully. And I'm going to stop it with everybody.
Having developed, intellectually developed Arab world.
Yes, absolutely. Does the West have an interest in that?
Yes.
Absolutely. Everybody has an interest, not just the West. I mean, what is the West now anyway? Is China the West? Is Japan the West? Is Australia, Brazil the West? No, the West is no longer really a traditional, geographically bound entity. The West is now a way of life. A way of doing business, a way from an economy, so the West has been totally deteriorated from its mores. If the West began in the 18th, the West emerged in Western Europe in the 18th century. Now the West is a totally global phenomenon, and some countries are excluded from this global Western culture, and most of them tend to be Muslim societies, particularly in the Arab world, because they haven't been able to catch up to what motivates the West. I mean, you can go to Berlin and find a big Saudi embassy with a lot of very imposing building in the heart of Berlin, but they're not Western in any way. They buy everything, they don't produce anything. They don't have any major research centers. Nobody does in the Arab world. If you read the document, the human rights development, human development in the Arab world reports that started coming out in the first part of the 21st century. The 2001 edition was named as, I think it was Book of the Year by Time magazine. It's nothing. It's all deficit. There's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing. No health system, no education, no infrastructure, nothing. This is what infrastructure they can buy, but no technology, no basic scientific research. All this is a lot of religion, but that's not really enough. So that creates adds the tension that creates a kind of resentment, and they come by everything from the West, from Europe, from the United States, or from Brazil or China, but then they feel that they want to feel superior because of their religion. So we all have an interest in making sure that these nations become better developed.
But isn't the ignorance of the Arab world kind of a competitive advantage of the Western world?
No. How could that be? How could that be? Development is good for everybody. If you make people prosperous, whether it's your neighbor down the road, whether it's a nation across the ocean, it lifts all boats. But if you keep a group of people poor and backward and so on and so forth, you're only causing trouble. That's not good for anybody.
I'm with you.
I just want to add one thing. South Korea, which is now an OECD nation, received development aid from Germany until like 25 years ago. And you might say, was it on charity? It was not charity. We help them to develop, and now they buy our products. So they both benefit. Okay, we got a little bit under pressure now. I would say like 5 minutes cigarette break for the